Good thing. Look under your seats.
Great. Hi. Whoa. Hey. Hot mic. Hey everyone. Thanks for finding the end of the hallway here at the end of the day. I was in the wrong room right before this, and the panel's like, "Where's he told us to meet ahead of time?" Hi, I'm Chris Barr from the Knight Foundation, and thanks for coming out. We have an extra large panel. We don't even all fit at the table today to talk about some projects that we funded a little more than a year ago now, and a little bit about their journey and things that they've been thinking about through a process we set up at Knight Foundation. On my left, I have Theresa Bembnister from the Akron Art Museum, Jennifer Inacio from Pérez Art Museum Miami, Stephen Brady from the Barr Foundation in Philadelphia, and Tommy Ralph Pace from ICA Miami. And I'm going to start quickly with a little story. And this is, if we could just keep this particular story between us. Don't use that at Knight FDN on your tweets. But I want to talk about a misstep that we made as a foundation before we launched this particular group of projects. So I would say 2 or 3 years ago, Knight Foundation has had a long interest in technology. We have a long-standing arts program as well. And for us, we've been thinking about how technology can help increase the relevancy of the arts institutions that we're invested in. But sometimes that has been, we are interested in shiny objects. And a few years back, we brought a group of these cats to the Cleveland Art Museum to look at fantastic shiny objects. And we sort of toured and we learned about the technology there and sort of said, hey, wouldn't you love these shiny objects in your museum? And in fact, we went out and we gave funding to the design firm that developed those to think about how could we white label some of that kind of technology in a way that it would be broadly applicable within museums. And we took those designs back to these museums and other partners that we work with to say, hey, wouldn't you love to have these in your museums? And what we heard back really quickly was, no. That's not for us. That's not what we do. And we said, well, shoot, we just spent a lot of money on that expensive design firm. And I got brought in shortly after that. I've been running technology on our media innovation team and our journalism teams. And it happened that I actually have an art background and was faking it on the journalism side. And we started over, and we started with this same group that we took through that experience, and we said, let's try this again. We'd love you to care more about technology. We think that there's a huge opportunity to meet audiences where they're at, and to think about what technology can do to help you achieve your goals. So we brought this group back together, and we took them through a process that was a little bit different than most grant processes. Typically, when you're competing for grants, it's bring us your great ideas, right? And part of the problem with asking people to start with great ideas, it assumes that they have a process to get to great ideas. And what I think we're finding out and that we have seen in a lot of fields that we work is that a lot of institutions don't have in-house innovation processes. So asking them to come to you with a great idea means that they're relying on a stroke of genius, hopefully. Maybe they'll have a quick brainstorming session to come up with some genius ideas. But there's not always a process that involves research and user studies and thinking about institutional goals to get to those great ideas. So what we said is, we care about these institutions in the cities where we work. We want to bring them along. Let's start before you have the idea. We worked with a design firm in Pittsburgh called Maya, fantastic human-centered design firm, to sort of start by doing a bit of research and sharing that research with the teams, but then bringing in the museum teams to go through a human-centered design process that helped them look at audience needs and then simultaneously think about institutional goals. And what we wanted to do was not to say, use the latest, greatest technology, VR or whatever it is. Instead, we wanted to say, what are you trying to achieve as a museum? And how can we get to some of those results faster using technology? What opportunities do you have internally to do that? And we're going to fund some of the risk that takes, right? And we're going to add some additional help through a design firm that's going to help you with the research, that's going to help you think about the project planning. One of the things you should know, one of these museums would say is unlike the others. The Barnes Foundation has a very robust technology team, but the other three came into this process not having a director of technology, not having huge technology staffs or people thinking about this. So how do you start a process without someone who's super savvy on the team thinking about technology and the opportunities that it presents? So this is sort of what we went through. And what I want to do now is not take you through every step of that process, but to jump you to the end and show you what these institutions end up making, and then come back together as a group to talk a little bit about the process in a panel format and take your questions about the insights that they had that led to these projects, and any other questions that you have. So we'll start with Theresa and the Akron Art Museum.
Thank you, Chris. I'll just say a couple words about the Akron Art Museum before I get started, in case you're not familiar with our institution. We are a museum of modern and contemporary art located in Northeast Ohio. We have about 5,500 objects in our collection, and we serve about 75,000 visitors a year. We have a full-time staff of 26 people. Until recently, that did not include anyone with the word digital or technology in their job title. We just recently hired a digital content specialist, is that right? Okay. But when we started this process, no one on staff had any kind of digital or technological background. Chris, would you hit the next slide? Thank you. So MCN, meet Dot. She is the Akron Art Museum's interactive digital tour guide, accessible in our galleries or anywhere, really, via Facebook Messenger. Dot takes museum visitors on a choose-your-own-adventure style tour of the museum's permanent collection. Anyone remember those books back from the 80s? Yeah. The tour makes 6 stops that are selected by the visitors, and it covers up to 60 different works of art. Dot shares fun facts about the art and asks questions to help visitors get to know the people who've accompanied them on their trip to the museum. Her content was created by a team of museum staff from the curatorial, education, and marketing departments. Dot's avatar was designed by illustrator Jordan Elise Perme from Cleveland, and she was built by the Form Group in Cleveland using Chatfuel Pro. Dot was officially launched to the public in early August. Her tone is casual, incorporating animated GIFs and emojis. Chris, next slide, please. If you'd like to see for yourself, please take out your phone and follow the instructions that you see on this slide. When visitors enter the museum, the staff behind our front desk welcomes them and directs them to a kiosk playing a video explaining how DOT works, including the instructions that you see here. We created 2 different types of content for DOT, one intended for groups of friends and the other intended for family. So DOT asks you who you're visiting with right off the bat. Of the 2 tracks, the Friends is more popular by 20%. Each tour starts at the Solowit mural in the museum's lobby, and DOT asks visitors a question to determine the next stop on the tour, and so on and so forth. So for example, one question reads, what's next? More artwork with patterns or more with hidden meanings? So if you choose to answer more patterns, DOT will take you to Pond Spring Awakening by Alma Thomas, which is an abstract painting with rhythmic brushstrokes that resemble water dripping on, raindrops on the surface of a pond. If you select hidden meanings, you'll end up at Radcliffe Bailey's J. Red House, which is a painting that incorporates a dinkra, a form of West African pictographic writing. So the tour navigation occurs through written directions. DOT sends visitors an image of the next work, which they use along DOT sends visitors an image of the next work, which they use along with a written set of directions to spot the next stop, tapping a button to alert DOT to their arrival. It's worth noting that our museum is relatively small and easily navigable, so I'm not sure that the same strategy would work for a larger building. DOT then delivers a pithy, fun fact about the artwork. True to the form of text-based communication, the artwork fact is only a single sentence long, and I should mention that Seema Rao of Brilliant Idea Studio, who's a volunteer coordinator at this conference, helped train our staff on how to write for digital. If a visitor wants more information on the artwork, he or she can click on the image in the chat window, which links to the museum's website. Finally, DOT asks a question to encourage discussion and reflection among the visitors. The question typically has very little to do with art history, but is related to the artwork in some way. And during our beta testing before DOT's official launch, I noticed 2 questions in particular that really caught people's attention. So I'll read you the text for the El Natsui right now. Those are actually hundreds of liquor bottle caps that have been flattened, folded, and wired together by artist El Natsui and his studio assistants. Which person in your group would be best at this kind of repetitive task? You know, the one most likely to be type A with a dash of OCD tendencies. Which person in your group would just volunteer to drink the rum? And surprisingly, to me at least, this question about Alma Thomas generated a lot of conversation. Fun fact, this artwork was created by a retired art teacher who went on to be the first African-American woman to have a solo exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City. What do you think your high school art teacher is doing today? So the purpose of these questions really is to get the visitors talking to each other. Okay, no, we're on the right side. So I wanted to close my portion of the presentation with images of Akron Art Museum visitors enjoying DOT and each other's company, because they really sum up what we were trying to accomplish with this project. While conducting observations early on in the development process, which I know we're going to talk about our process later on in this conversation, the Akron Art Museum team noticed that for our visitors, the galleries were a site of social interaction. And we wanted to use technology to foster connections between people and the works of art, but especially between the friends and family who are using that technology. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Inacio, and I'm assistant curator at PAM, Pérez Art Museum Miami. I wasn't brought into this project. I was brought into this project at a much later phase, and maybe we'll talk about the process. But I didn't come into the process until we decided that we wanted to work with an artist and create an artist-based project using augmented reality. So, but with that in mind, I did come in with these discussions of us thinking about our museum and thinking about how to literally thinking about how to bring artworks beyond the museum wall and what can technology or how can technology help us do that. So prior to identifying an artist to do this project, they thought a lot about the architecture of the museum, thinking about this space. If you are not aware, yeah, next slide, please. Aware of Pam, it's it sits right near the bay and it has this beautiful outdoor space that sometimes a lot of visitors come to just explore that area, and sometimes they don't even come into the museum. They might just go for a lunch or for a jog and just end up hang out under hanging gardens and enjoying the view. So I really wanted to activate this space and bring artworks to these visitors and find a way to engage them with our exhibition program. So Felice Groden is a local artist. She has an architectural background, which has helped a lot in this conceptual phase of the project. And she works, a lot of her drawings and installation work researches and explores the intersection of art and environment, particularly environment within Miami and considering climate change and our constant concern of sea level rise within Miami. So she brought these ideas with her to this project. What's interesting is that Felice does not have this really digital background. So we were all like delving into this project, really questioning or even pushing boundaries of augmented reality, working with our developers and just really being ambitious. So I think this, for both the artists and me as a curator, really brought really interesting and engaging experiences with technology. But to go back to the thought of the exhibition, invasive species, Felice wanted to activate the outdoor or the architecture of the building, thinking of Pam as this critical space to think critically about our climate realities and using it as a platform to propose these new discussions and dialogues to our audience, but of course using technology to wheel people into this discussion. Maybe next slide would be helpful. And Felice really embraced AR as this tool to explore these alternative realities, these, or as she says, this tool for new world making to actively talk about a controversial topic within our surrounding environment, and then thinking also about the museum. Really engaging with the audience. For example, this is an interaction that you'll see that would only happen as the visitors, actively touch the screen and activate the animation of this bug, of this invasive species that she created. So she really explored the environments of the museum and this technology to create this digital habitat that reflects on the fragile state of our ecosystem, while also speculating about the future world that's overtaken by uncanny creatures or invasive species such as the bug. Maybe next slide. And as these are just, I wanted to juxtapose some images of the process where at the top left you see her playing with in AutoCAD with the structure of the museum, the architecture and overlaying her works. And on the next slide, you'll see that all of these works, all of these 4 works that we created that she was commissioned to do were inspired by drawings and physical works that she created in years past. And it was really interesting process. We weren't just overlaying and completely transferring or translating this into a digital world. We're really using these as tools to create new works. What I think important elements that augmented reality brought to both her, me as a curator, the museum, as an institution, is that we were able to really engage with visitors as part of this design process and figuring out what project we would do. We had a series of surveys asking our visitors, going back to them and asking their feedback, what they would like to see or how they would like to interact in an exhibition. So we were able to incorporate a lot of that into these works, which is something we usually don't, we don't often do surveys before creating an exhibition. So that's a really important element. I think that this project brought to us, Also, the immersive quality, that's another aspect that a year before that we had an exhibition that was very interactive and immersive, so we tried to consider that success and bring this into this this merging of these two worlds between the physical and the digital. And then one important part too is the democratizing the art experience, because as you see, as you've seen in these pictures, all of these works are outside. Anyone that downloads this free app can experience this work without necessarily having to go inside the museum and pay an admission. I think there's only, there is only one work, which is Mesbuk, which is inside, but also with this QR code, we're going to be exhibiting one of these works offside of the museum at the art fair in Miami this year. So it's really creating, this dialogue not just with our visitors within the museum, but also expanding and reaching to new audiences that might never, have the chance to get to the museum. So I'll just stop here and
Hi everybody, I'm Steve Brady from the Barnes Foundation, and our project was born out of ambition and necessity. The last time our website had been updated was 2011 with a major redesign, and we had a lot of projects last year that were lined up, including a major redesign of the website. And what ended up happening was the original website was kind of very tightly coupled. The collection was kind of within it. It was very structured. It was the way you'd expect to look up that kind of information in an accession database like eMuseum or TMS. People were expected to kind of get exact queries right. They had to do a drop down and understand what a classification object was, or a period, or a culture. And we had to separate out the collection website from the main website to free us up and give us the ability to explore and experiment with what we were presenting to people. And the ambition was to create a website, a collection website, that was both accessible to the layperson in terms of browsing the collection, and also something that would create a platform for us to expand on further. So we could free the data from the database and allow a lot more tools to kind of be built on top of that metadata. So here you see an example of our collection as it is now online. And so our great idea, as Chris mentioned about getting to great ideas and how you get to them, we found one that was almost 100 years old. So our founder classified the works in his gallery by the dimensions of light, line, color, and space. And so what we did is we took a modern slant on that, and with all the computer vision libraries out there, we worked with a professor from Rutgers who now has a business called Art Trendex, and we worked with Michael Walter Studios to really have the computer kind of understand these different dimensions. Color is something that has been solved a few times already. We actually built on top of Cooper Hewitt code that classified the color before. And then we worked on these other dimensions which weren't as well defined in a lot of areas. So the depth of space, things like that. And basically, the great thing about this is if you go to the next slide and you pick one of these works based on your selections, you then see to the side things that are more visually similar or surprising, and you get to choose that. So what you can do is you can pick the dimension blue as a color and vertical broken lines. And then what ends up happening is you can see things that are more similar to that or less similar to that. And what was great about it is, anybody can say, I want to follow this color. Anybody can say, I like this, I like this pattern of lines. And access the collection and kind of dive deeper and deeper and find more works that they like without having to know all these weird text fields that you have to fill in. And also it allows people to kind of create their own collection, create their own connections between what they see. When the computer brings them something, they say, oh, I see the similarity, I see the pattern, or no, that's completely not something I'd expect. And it went from everyone, like the general public, our docents, everybody was really engaged with the process. And it was really interesting. So the other part of this is, the other things that we built into it are things that are becoming more common in the collections nowadays. So we did a really good job scrubbing our copyright. status of all of our works. Anything that was in the public domain is freely downloadable as a high-res TIFF by anyone in the entire world. And anything that's under copyright, we kind of just follow the rules and allow different ways of interacting with the art. And just to go on to the next slide, and this is probably the least visually interesting of all the slides, but this is the platform. So there on the screen is a query on the left and a lot of data being returned on the right. While it's not great to look at, it's great to develop on top of. It really does let us build new tools on top of, and kind of, to use the pop culture Alton Brown phrase, we built a multitasker. We built something that now we have, we're working on something now that's a visual scan of the galleries, and we're using this metadata. We're using this metadata in several places. For those of you who are following some of those online artist collections, Andre, I forget his last name, but he basically has created a lot of bots that are going against these publicly accessible APIs and just, little accounts that are uploading and providing information about the works every day. So we're really excited to be able to kind of, democratize our collection, to be able to make it accessible to the world, and to allow a bunch of different ways of kind of expanding this exploration of what's going on in the museum.
Hi, I'm Tommy Pace. I'm the Deputy Director at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Miami. And piggybacking off of Chris' story, we, the font didn't download, so just right past that. We were part of the initial cohort who went to Cleveland, and I think there was a sense of trepidation, I think, as he elegantly put it earlier, from the museums who just weren't sure if the physical gallery space was where we wanted technology really to take center stage. And throughout the process, we were in a really unique position to be building a brand new art museum. So the concept of having a museum without walls really rang true to us as we were going through this kind of learning experience with the Knight Foundation. And what we landed on, even though we obviously learned a great deal from the group in terms of implementing university level Wi-Fi throughout the building while we were building, just simple infrastructure things that I think we picked up, we didn't end up with any massive digital thing in our galleries. And we kind of felt very strongly about the fact that what this allowed us to do as an institution was kind of land on a digital philosophy. How do we want to engage with digital in a variety of ways? And we really landed on the fact that we wanted to put artists first and really create relevance through context, providing more context to contemporary art, which obviously gets sometimes a bad rap, and figuring out ways to do that that didn't impact the gallery experience as well. So the next slide. So our pilot project really landed on developing digital video strategies and storytelling. And to date, I think that has, one, as a process, allowed the museum to develop an internal muscle that's been beyond ROI on just the grant. I mean, we've just recently had the opportunity through our film stuff to be part of a Judy Chicago biopic. I mean, there's just a ton of legs that have grown, and if you can go to the next slide. So to date, we've created over 50 pieces of content online at isaimiami.org/channel. So check it out. I'll spare you with video today because I know we're going to get to a conversation. But we really took the stance that artist stories are important to be shared and told, and museums have a responsibility to document that outside of just a curatorial voice or institutional perspective. We really wanted to let artists tell their own stories, alongside taking kind of the canonical role of saying, we're gonna film everything the museum does in multi-camera, multi-angle shots. So when we edit something together online, whether it's a 90-second video or a 5-minute story, it can compete. There's tons of museums who do the live stream, which is great, but it's very hard to watch that when you're used to watching TED Talks. So that we thought as a responsibility for a young organization was where we could really run the fastest with an approach to digital, and landing in that philosophy has also allowed us to expand in other areas that we find interesting as well. So I'll leave it at that, and we can get to the conversation, which I think is the meat of it.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I wanted to kick off with a couple questions. First thing I want to start with is, to my left here, we have two curators. And they have commented on the fact that your conference is not that friendly to curators, that there are lots of conversations around, but my curators would never let me do that. And I think that's a reality, right? I think that there is a central node of power within our institutions, and curatorial holds a lot of that power. And we have to bring these people on board if we want to do things with technology, and we have to understand their perspective and priorities in order to make really great choices. So I wanted to start with you two as curators who've been brought into technology projects. And maybe we could start with Akron, because you had a very fun sort of Linus and Lucy start to this project. And maybe you could talk about what you learned there and what the big insight was that led to DOT.
Sure. And now I regret mentioning this curator thing to Chris before this.
I didn't say who said it.
So we did not come to this very first meeting in Pittsburgh with an idea of what we wanted to do. And part of that is just that Akron Art Museum, as I mentioned, we didn't have anyone on staff with a focus on technology. We didn't even have Wi-Fi in our galleries. So we kind of designed a way that we could stall a little bit, I guess, in a very fruitful way. And we came up with a project that has a title that's very curator-centered. So it was called The Curator is In, and it was based a little bit on the idea behind Brooklyn's Ask app. And so the curator, I would sit in the galleries behind a desk and with a sign that said the curator was in. And so we did get some inspiration from Lucy's, is it the psychologist, the doctor is in, kind of thing. And so we sat there and we waited for people to ask us questions, and we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited, and no one really, the only time anyone asked me a question is if one of the security guards was like, you can ask her questions. But we did notice when we spent that time in the gallery that the visitors really wanted to talk to each other. And so the time that we spent in the gallery, even though our original thesis was incorrect, people weren't coming in with these burning questions that they wanted to ask a curator, but they did want to chat with each other. So the time that we spent in the galleries observing was actually something that led to the very final version of the technology that we created.
Yeah, if you could talk a little bit about PAM, and I think one of the things that's interesting about the PAM project is you all started with an idea that was kind of the first thing you think of with augmented reality, like we're going to point this thing at an artwork and we're going to get another layer of information about the artwork. And where you ended up was we can use this technology to make exhibition space that we don't have. And it gave you a chance to work with a local Miami artist. That artist was fluent in technology, which helped. But talk about how bringing an artist into that sort of building a product, what that was like.
Yeah, I think, content-wise, like the fight between the content and technology was challenging for me a little bit, like going back to your initial, points about curators and technology, because it was something so new and so interesting and so flashy that I had to constantly also fight for the exhibition, the content of the artists, and be like, okay, it's an innovative technology, but we also have to consider the concept and the conceptual part of this exhibition, because like you said, we use this not to just transfer something that was existing into this new language, digital language, but the artists did use this as a tool, just like a painting or graphite on paper, to create her works. And that tells a lot, I think, from this experience that we went through. So thinking about the space was also very important to this, because all these questions, curatorially ran through our heads when we were thinking about working with an artist, either inside the museum or not. Inside, we faced multiple challenges of what does it mean to overlay digital work on top of someone else's work, right? That might not be completely aware that this is happening. So that's an ethical question, like would the AR work, the bug, on top of, I don't know, Solowitz mean something else, and would that artist be happy with that? So that's also another layer of what also brought us outside and thinking really outside the box, thinking outside that white cube space. And the works are so site specific. That's the other thing too, that with this technology, it really allowed the artists to, like I said before, really merge these two worlds. So I think it was really an innovative way to think, engaging with the audience as well, like really thinking and getting some feedback. So yes, I think curators do or should be really thinking and asking these questions on how the experience of the viewer, how viewers really experience an exhibition or an artwork. It is important. It doesn't matter just to think of an amazing idea, and if they're not really engaging with it.
So one of the things that I think I've heard echoed in other sessions that I've been in is there's a tension between how work gets done in museums and how work gets done in technology, and my thought is even sort of the notion of museum quality is at odds with sort of the iteration that's inherent in technology, right? One of the things that I think through the work that we've tried to do at Knight Foundation is to create some space for museums to learn what that feels like, right? Like what it feels like to put something rough and that's going to break in front of their audience, and to build up the confidence to do that. So I thought I'd throw it to you, Stephen. Maybe you could talk a little bit about iteration and how you all deal with sort of development cycles when we're talking about exhibition cycles that are like 2 years in the planning versus technology cycles that are 2-week sprints.
Right, so yeah, it's interesting, and I think you just have to look at every time you test it, either internally or you put it in front of other people, as a learning experience. You kind of define some variables, you measure for them, whether that's surveying the people that are testing, and then eventually you end up finding patterns in the data. You find correlations, sometimes you find causations, sometimes you find things that you thought were related that weren't when you actually get to it. And I know we talked about experimentation and not being afraid to fail, and it is true. But every failure is a learning experience that gets you to the next step. When we started with it, we did some due diligence on making sure the basic metadata could make it out of our collection database, and we put it on a brand new commodity product of eMuseum on top of TMS with its API that we were all raw API through eMuseum on. And then when we went to the computer vision, we tested out the commercial platforms of classifiers. So like Microsoft, Amazon, things like that. And there's an awful lot of teddy bears and walls full of graffiti that the computer sees when you try to classify it in language. because those systems are trained to say, these are 1,000 examples of a wall of graffiti. These are 1,000 images of teddy bears. And our collection, being a lot of impressionist works, feels very soft and like tactile and teddy bear-like. So, we learned from that, oh, well, we're not going to just have people search for teddy bear and come up with things in our collection, although we did find some real cherubs in our collection. But, we were able to take that data and say, well, the computer did find a relationship between these two things, that they had a similar quality, even though it wasn't accurate from our understanding of what a teddy bear is. It kind of felt that there was a similar quality in those things. And so we took that as a learning experience and we made it one of the dimensions that was matching on general similarity beyond those other dimensions. And again, we would test things would break, we would keep testing them, and we continually iterate, add more content, take away some content, change the way the formulas work and the sliders work, for the similar and surprising. And a lot of work went into that, because you didn't want to say, show me things that are similar to Renoir and get 50 other Renoirs necessarily in a collection like the Barnes, where there's a lot of 3D cultural works and there's kind of like common artifacts that have relationships to these famous names. So, sometimes we had to intervene, like, too many Renoirs. Let's put some layer of intelligence in that and realize that, there was kind of a formula to the rooms, the way the walls were laid out in ensembles. So let's kind of take that formula and run a bit of a bucket filter through things to make sure that we don't end up with all one type of painting by one artist, that we end up with some metalwork, we end up with some furniture, we end up with some different cultural artifacts that all represent the same thing. So again, it's, you just look at everything as a challenge. You do want to get it done quickly, and you consider the fact that the outcome is learning and not necessarily that polished product, because you're going to keep iterating and changing. We did launch the online collection about a year ago, and we're still adding to it, enhancing to it. Again, that concept of building on the platform, we're still learning every day how to kind of squeeze more juice out of the orange.
How is leadership with this?
Supportive.
Livelihood, yeah.
Yeah, Shelley Bernstein as our kind of experience officer brought a lot of that prototyping, that process in. Very supportive. Our executive director Tom Collins, and we continue that, and we as much as possible engage the rest of the internal audience and kind of work through the process. We share both internally much more often than we do in the blogs. The blogs that you'll see from like Shelley's Medium posts and things like that are kind of the distilled version of that, but we're constantly going back and forth. We're doing the surveys and we're sharing we're very transparent about sharing the surveys with everyone internally, saying, this is the connection we think we see, what do you guys see? Okay, we pushed this variable too far and now people are getting fatigued, so we need to pull that one back. So a lot of that has been like, focusing on the open communication and understanding that we're all measuring to the same rubric.
I want to get one question down to Tommy here before I open it up to the room. You all are ruthlessly artist-centered, which as an Institute of Contemporary Art, you should be. One of the things a year or two back, I was in a meeting and something that sort of has stuck in my brain that a director from a contemporary art museum said was that we go where artists lead us, right? And I'm curious if you all are finding that more and more artists are wanting to work with these new technologies and looking to the museum as the resource to achieve technological visions that they couldn't do on their own.
Yes, Chris. No, I would say that I think in terms of some to the leadership question and kind of where things get segmented between curatorial and like operational digital, we just did a major exhibition by Sandra Perry. We traveled it from the Tate. It was a massive digital installation, very aggressively political as well. But it didn't really have, that was an exhibition program, and that's where curators will lead us. I think one of the things that's, I think the challenge in some of the conversations that happen around bringing technology into the museum is that it's just kind of always stated like that, and that just scares people to death. Because I think one of the most beautiful things learned from this cohort was watching Akron go through that process and then coming back and saying, guess what? Our visitors come to the museum to be with each other and talk to each other and learn things in our space. And we were like, that was like a validation point for like museum work. We're like, okay, we're doing something right, as opposed to just wanting to come in and be on their phone for another 45 minutes. So I think that's part of where we have a lot of work to do as a field in kind of helping define some of these entry points. Because I think once you have skin in the game, so to speak, in terms of the leadership question, it starts to, like, those challenges evaporate. Once you've taken that first leap to just say, as an institution, digital is something that's important to us, however you end up executing that. So yeah, absolutely.
Questions? Run the mic.
Thank you.
So thanks a lot. It was very interesting to hear about all of your projects. So I have two questions, but they're related. So the first one is for you, Jennifer, and that is, did you, or have you found that people are very willing and happy to download an app, or is there some, hesitation, which leads to the second question, which is for everybody, which is, did you have a set of metrics that you were going to use to benchmark how successful these projects are?
Great question.
Is this working? Hello? Okay, yeah, one of the, our decisions to integrate this augmented reality work that really helped a lot was to integrate into our PAM app. So as opposed to asking visitors to download 2 apps, as soon as they walk into a museum, they can download one app, and in that app, they can get access to our augmented reality exhibition, but also additional content like some video storytelling that we do, also interview artists, and that's included within other exhibitions throughout the museum, some audio tours. So that really helped us to put it all, very easy and accessible to people to download. We've also incorporated some docents, depending on the docents, how comfortable they feel with this exhibition, is that we have this architectural tour at the museum. So the docents that are really excited about Felice's project, they find a way to incorporate her work into this architectural, because her works are so site-specific and very, a reflection of our building. And yeah, so there's been, that we have instructions. Another question too that we question when we're thinking about this work is, how do we make this visible, right? For people to know that this digital work is even there. So Maya helped us a lot in surveying, in helping us with signs and elements that help people. So yeah, it's been a interesting process.
It should also be noted that they use QZM, so if your museum is a QZM user, that thanks to PAM, there's AR capabilities within that app now.
And I'm just, to speak to the other part, I mean, I found metrics as one of the hardest challenges to map. It's okay, I have a loud voice. Only because, for instance, metrics on digital video, we know how we can make the most successful viral video. I mean, it involves cats and probably naked things, and that would be very easy. So figuring out what was important, was it eyeballs? Was it engagement? Challenges we're still working through today. So I think that's something everyone should think about. We operate, I think, by a different set of metrics sometimes, in terms of some of the nonprofit vision and mission stuff. Yeah.
This is a question for Stephen. So when these works are getting these connections, so like a vertical line, does that element have to be in the metadata cataloged, or are you plugging into a different system that helps make those connections?
So so we basically did that in batch work with the original installation, and it does become another dimension of the metadata. But what's great now is we were working with that product I mentioned, our Trendex, before it was a product. It was still kind of a research project at Rutgers with this professor, and he's turned it into a product that now has a live API. So as more of the objects in our collections get high resolution photography, we can now submit them to that engine and process the additional dimensions kind of as we move. Our collection doesn't change, but as the online presence of our collection increases and the number of objects, we can do that now on the fly.
After you run the images through analysis, is it going strictly into Elasticsearch, or is it also flowing back into TMS?
So TMS is sacred, so it's the source of truth. So things come out of TMS but don't necessarily go back in, don't go back in. It's a one-way from that system, but then we kind of use, people say like, data lakes or things like that. We kind of use the pool of information all ends up in Elasticsearch to power a lot of our public-facing tools.
My question is if maybe a couple of you could share one takeaway from your process that made you think differently about your future projects, maybe to the extent that is changing how you're doing the process.
One thing that I think I've learned personally is that it's okay to be wrong. We really thought when we came up with this curator is an idea that people would come up and ask us questions, and they didn't. That was okay. We came up with something even better from being wrong. So I think that Knight did something very smart in pairing us with a human-centered design firm, because we were able to learn from those methods. And like Chris mentioned earlier, it takes a couple years to put together an exhibition. Like fast fail is not something that you do as a curator, at least. So that was definitely my biggest takeaway.
Could I also mention that you are now hiring a technology position?
We are.
So
Yes.
if anyone's looking for a job, talk to Jennifer in the front row.
Yeah, I would go back to considering and surveying, questioning the viewers to see what they're interested in experiencing at an exhibition. That was really helpful to me, as a curator, thinking about future projects, how to either enhance that experience or facilitate certain dialogues. I think that, and of course this was with Maya, also helped us do that. If it weren't for the surveys and the questioning, that wouldn't have happened.
A takeaway, which I don't know if it applies to how I think about future digital projects, but working within the cohort and having a group to bounce ideas off of, and just to watch as everyone's going through the same type of experience is invaluable. So my takeaway overall is like museum field needs to do a lot more of that, just talking to each other a lot more. So that's really it.
My question goes to the, what is our process for finding great ideas? So I'd like to know who from your organization was a part of these human design, or these, design sessions, and what would you recommend with regard to making sure that you have a diversity of voices across your museum contributing to generating these ideas?
I'll start and say I'm the deputy director, and I stayed through all of them, and we took very much that approach in kind of rotating staff members through some of the cycles. We had our artistic director, we had our marketing manager, we had one of our vendors who does a lot of our graphic design work come to one of the sessions. So we definitely took a it takes a village approach and tried to milk as much out of the Maya sessions as possible.
And I would echo what Tommy said. We had a curatorial department, education, director's office, marketing. It really was a cross-section of the museum who worked on this project together.
And are you continuing to do it? Are those groups continuing to meet to continue to feed the pipeline?
Yes, but as Chris mentioned, that we are looking for a chief experience officer / technology officer. So I expect that after we find someone in that position, that will kind of help shape our philosophy even more. But I think because of the size of our institution, a lot of the things that we do in Akron are very much multi-departmental kind of initiatives.
I would say, just to really add quickly, our time frame was very tight on our project. So we didn't necessarily make it a completely democratic process. We definitely involved conversation, and we displayed at milestones and made inflection points at the different milestones. But there was a good cadence of that actually is happening more often now, with that we're kind of in more of a continual development, continual integration cycle. That the things that we learned from those first steps on that project, where we had a very tight timeline and couldn't necessarily veer off of at least the primary direction that we were headed in, that now we are, we do a lot better with all projects, or most projects, I think, because we put it, it's on the board, everyone can see it in the organization, we check in more often with everybody, and we just kind of keep that communication flowing.
Yeah. Could I say a couple words about this as well, because it's something I care deeply about? I'm of the opinion that innovation is for everybody. Everyone needs to be part of that process, that it's not just one role where we're expecting ideas to come out, but more importantly, it requires process, right? And in order to do innovation within an institution, you need some disciplined practices. You need a house methodology for innovation. We use human-centered design in a lot of our training because we just find it to be a lot more accessible than running museum professionals through Six Sigma or something like that. And it gives people radical permission, right? So how do you give people permission to make it part of their job? And then how do you think about the pipeline of ideas? How does something move from something that we're thinking about and tinkering with to something that we're going to invest in doing a prototype to see if that sort of assumption was a good assumption, to now this is something that we want to fully develop into a product and is going to have a multi-year life within our institution. That again requires process and management, and it's not sort of genius, it's really management and organizational structure that really makes that happen. Any other questions for the group? Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and hopefully you can talk to these folks more about what they're doing individually, and we'll see you around the conference.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
We're, I'm like, sorry, I couldn't even. I was shocked that we were able to make it here.
Leaving in my inbox.
Our gala's on Saturday.
My education associate director is really interested in honestly what you guys did is like courses together. We would love to try to do. Would you be open to us coming down for that? Okay.
Yeah,
I'll follow up in
yeah, definitely wasn't a no.
Yeah.
I'm not because I was trying to my kids were like, my anniversary is this weekend.
Oh my gosh.
And then we have like 4 days off for Thanksgiving. I'm like, I'll do everything in December. But yeah, definitely be open to you guys. Let me just respond to you. And, how do the next few weeks look at, like the start of December? So yeah, either week after Thanksgiving or next Wednesday too. We're going to be busy, but I think kind of the end around the slow down. So let us focus on our task and get you guys. Okay. I'd love to have you guys.
Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah, no, I'm doing something.
I'm off Friday.
Again, all these events, like, get up to the website or stay on some shows. Okay, let's do that. Old snow. My other kid was stamped during the high school. I was like the flu like Ithaca. I'm like, oh my god, they're all falling apart.
I know. I got off the plane, got onto the train, and then my wife was like, the car is spinning. And I'm like, ah. But yeah, definitely look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks.
Hi, Steve. I actually work for a startup company but that was very brief. But what I'm interested in is how you guys
very carefully and with our general counsel and with an intern who spent pretty much 6 months on it. They looked up every law across the globe that they could find, because we have things of African origin, like World Heritage things, and essentially we deferred on the side of caution, and we didn't know. We picked the least restrictive rights that we felt were the right ones. So and we kind of continually watched that cycle, and I forget there was an artist family that just released the rights. They kind of released their ownership of the rights, and they were like, yeah, they would check off the box and change them from artist plus 120 years to now public domain. So we did it with a lot of research, and literally we kind of created the spreadsheets for them to help fill in the data, and then we took those and kind of bulk import it into TMS. But a lot of it was done in our legal department. But definitely, if you email me at the Barnes, and I can probably put you in touch with our general counsel who can kind of tell you what the generic process. And I think we have I think we started with 11 classifications. We moved down to 7. I think we felt comfortable compressing them into. And basically, I think at least for our collection and what we represented, those 7 classifications were the ideal for us.
Yeah, so quite a few classifications actually. So, and did you use your own standards, or was it Creative Commons?
I wasn't even directly involved in the technical aspect of it. But I could definitely give you the list of what they were.
Yeah, it was a really interesting talk.
Yeah, pleasure meeting you.
And frankly, thank you. It's overarching management, so we have a lot less. They had a lot more room to, ask for information. And we're not but it's just like you guys have it's very interesting. I worked at the
I don't think I've been back. I was there when I was like,
so you probably know her. I remember going to now getting a picture of the artist. Yes. I read myself on it, and I was kind of clothing and that's great.
Yeah, just the infrastructure and the pipes.
And I know when we met with Seb Chan, he was still at people he was as well, and TMS and shadow TMS, and the whole time he's talking about the curators are so not but they're we're to the point now where I think we're ready to start talking about how do we set up our organization process to make sure that we've got good ideas coming through. But this seems like you have solved a lot of problems.
Yeah, and I think we open source the code. That's part of our requirement. We want to, I'll say it's a little brittle and specific to us, but the underlying infrastructure is fairly clear.
But just even understanding how you're implementing it from a solutions perspective, so that whatever tweaks we need to do to make sure that our world having a place to start.
And our IT, and we work with partners a lot, and our IT department has one one of which is like on the ticketing system, and then like two kind of generalists, including myself. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be kind of gathered from the systems as they are, and I think that's kind of the strength of what we've come up with, and why it continues to be growing in a positive way, as opposed to just like maintaining, like plugging the holes in the dam, is that we focused on commodity. Because that's out there, that will be supported.
And that's what because sustainability is an issue. Like the person, that craft person who had leaves, and that kind of thing. Not even sure how it's built. So that would be great. And
Your brain
Yeah, I know. It's like I keep joking. I'm like, oh, maybe I feel like we see it in New York, some more in DC and everything. We actually we wanted to take a look at the Hirshhorn Eye. And my family was like, well, school year, a pair of 6-year-olds will be 7 in January. Brady has gotten like school grown up going to DC. I'm like, no, once in my life, I think, in high school. And they're like, we go down several times a year, and it's like, we want to see this, we want to see that. It's all the dinosaurs before they close at natural history. And they're like African American, it's so popular still. It's like, time cooking at home. But yeah, definitely, I'd love to come down.
Okay. What's your email?
Sure, that's Brady, like the bus. At Barr. Word doc. Like most Word doc.
I'll be in touch and we'll see because like I said, we've been open 2 years, we're taking it